Hello, everyone. Welcome. So I'm Mistress of Ceremonies. I'm a sex worker here in Alaska. Welcome from Alaska. People can introduce themselves in that chat over there. The question answer, you can kind of talk about things in there, I guess. But thanks for joining us and Stop the Raids. We're going to talk about the upcoming 2024 elections and its consequences for our community, including a review of some of the presidential candidates' records. Plus, we're going to have a vote to demand representation for our economic and social rights. So we know that the Sex Worker Nation we're a large group of people with diverse backgrounds, different priorities, different issues, and different political and party affiliations. Also, needless to say, I'm not a tech wizard. I figure things out as needed, but so bear with us today as we're kind of in this learning process groove, right? We're all going to work together to make a better community, and this is just part of the process. Let's please exercise tolerance today with each other as the presenters, as the panelists discuss issues facing our community at the federal level in the election cycle. So we understand that folks are in different states, different time zones, and your vote is your vote. So whatever it is, just vote. Our final goal here today will be to craft a demand letter to whomever is seated as president, including a press release that can come out of this whole process as well. So be sure to post those comments or questions that you have in the question thing. And at the end, we'll also have a questionnaire. And this is going to be helping us to focus on the 5 main asks for the incoming administration. So right now, I'm going to turn it back over to Maxine.
I just wanted to first start with reminding everyone about our potential candidates came to ask the state party for their endorsement. We marched through the California State Democratic Convention to demand repeal of FOSTA. Doms Against Donald Trump did a FOSTA die-in on the steps of the entrance. So all the Democratic presidential primary candidates saw us. All the statewide legislators and their legislative aides saw us. This visibility played an important role in helping pass Senate Bill 233, which created immunity for everyone in California from prostitution arrests when we're victims or witnesses reporting serious crimes. This law also removed condoms as evidence from prostitution cases. When we fight, we win. I'm going to review Kamala Harris's record on her time as the San Francisco district attorney, because it will give us some clues about what to expect from her if elected president and what we as a community need to do to further our economic and social rights. I did a public records request of Kamala when she was the district attorney in 2006 because I wanted, as an activist, to find out what the government is doing around prostitution arrests and how it is that we could hold them accountable and to find places where we could demand change. Kamala didn't provide the documents I had a right to and didn't respond to the public records request in a timely manner. Here's a copy of that violation order issued against her by the San Francisco Sunshine Task Force. When we don't have transparent government, we don't have good government, America. Also, as district attorney, Kamala's crusade against Prop K, a San Francisco citywide ballot measure that would have removed criminal penalties for prostitution. She is the source of the false and misleading statement that is used widely to this day by anti-prostitutionists who repeat this dishonest claim that we have to be, subject as consensual adults, youth and actual sex trafficking victims to the violence of prostitution arrest as a means to investigate forced labor in the sex industry, when clearly they do not need to arrest us to investigate that. She, like others who oppose our rights, are literally holding us hostages, and that is completely unacceptable. Kamala's crusade against Backpage is another place where she used the power of her elected position as California State Attorney General that brought trumped-up charges against the Backpage owners twice, and those charges were dismissed twice. The second time when she brought those charges was right before she left for her state, from her state attorney general position to take the U.S. Senate seat. So once she was seated as the U.S. Senator, she used her power to continue her crusade against them by yelling at them in a Senate hearing where they couldn't defend themselves because they had to invoke their Fifth Amendment right to remain silent because of the charges she had filed against them right before she left as the state attorney general. So she demonstrates that she's willing to use her power in conjunction with unjust laws to strip citizens of our right to defend ourselves against these same unjust laws to further her career. And nobody in that case was convicted of sex trafficking, let alone sex trafficking of a minor. The DC 2020 platform had a statement, or the Democratic National Convention 2020 platform had a statement that said, "We recognize that sex workers who are disproportionately women of color and transgender women face especially high rates of sexual assault and violence, and we work with states and localities to protect the lives of sex workers." This was removed from the 2024 platform, and shame on the Democrats. Also at the Democratic National Convention was a punch down from Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas, who was allowed to say that Donald Trump had 34 felonies, 2 impeachments, and 1 porn star, as if Trump had possession of the porn star, which is pejorative. That Congresswoman should have thanked Stormy Daniels publicly for her sacrifice, but instead used her and our industry as a political trope. The Congresswoman would never have had those 34 felonies to talk about without Stormy. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't even say her name, and she demonstrated that woman-on-woman violence in the public spheres is okay when it is not. And she owes Stormy Daniels and our community an apology, a public apology. What we as a community should be most concerned about is Kamala's statement regarding decriminalization of prostitution in the 2019 Roots interview. Her response again shows the usual political doublespeak, conflating our male clients with men who force people into the sex trade. Let's be clear here. The sex trade is not supporting this type of phony model that would leave our clients criminalized. The research shows that leaving our clients' ability to agree to our solicitation for sex criminalized leads to more surveillance and violence against us, the erotic service providers. Leaving our clients criminalized violates our rights to negotiate for our own labor and our own safe work conditions. Allowing people who don't work in our industry to dictate the terms of our work conditions that they themselves won't be working under is called an unfair business practice. So let's be aware of this rhetoric and continue to be united in complete decriminalization for both the erotic service providers and our clients. I'm going to end by saying that we as a community should make the new administration aware of how many young women of color have been actual victims of sex trafficking who are now convicted of federal sex trafficking charges and have to register as sex offenders for the rest of their lives. These cases should be brought before the next president to get them a full pardon, meaning that they should be released from all punishments and disabilities, erase all the criminal records, and have no sentence to serve and all rights restored. This group of folks were wrongly identified by cops and overzealous prosecutors who furthered their careers on this vulnerable population's backs. I know that many in our community are not going to be voting for Donald Trump because of the porn ban named in Project 2025 and for other reasons. However, in reviewing Harris's record, no matter who will be leading the next administration, we are going to have to be united and fight, because when we fight, we win.
All right. Thank you, Maxine. Okay, next up, that was very enlightening. Thank you for doing that. That was amazing. Next up, we have Bella Robinson. Now, Bella needs no introduction, but she is the founder and executive director of Coyote, Rhode Island. So without further ado, Bella.
Thank you, Amber. So much like most other people here, I've been a sex worker for 40 years. I've done street-based work, escorting, and I had the opportunity to move to Rhode Island, and I actually worked under decriminalization, and it was wonderful. It's a game changer when people can't threaten to tell on you. It takes all the power away. So Harris was also really responsible for creating FOSTA. And I remember when one of the child acts in 2014, I had to go talk to Senator Sheldon, and I didn't know, oh my God, I was scared to death. So anyway, we did a survey 2 weeks after FOSTA passed because we wanted to understand the immediate effects. And then we did one in 2022 because effects change over time. So we're pretty smart. We start to figure things out and adapt to life changes. So we did this 4 years of FOSTA and it was this survey, and what we found out is what we already knew we were going to find out, but we have the data to prove it. So FOSTA increased violence and trafficking within the sex industry. It created dangerous work conditions, increased violence and exploitation, and increased street-based work. It decreased blacklists. So those are like databases that we put bad clients to warn each other. It made screening less possible. When you know who someone is and where they work, they're less likely to murder you. FOSTA decreased community support among sex workers, increased homelessness. FOSTA negatively impacted public safety, and FOSTA harmed survivors more. And how we know this is even DOJ wrote a report that once all those websites moved overseas, where they didn't have to comply to U.S. subpoenas, they couldn't investigate trafficking. They always said that Backpage was the best tool they had to fight trafficking. It was like the Walmart of escort ads. And now they're what? On 1,000 different sites, right? So resiliency and distrust of those who were less impacted, believe it or not, were those who entered as minors. I think they get street smart when they're thrown out in the streets and they get a fend for themselves. So we have a right to negotiate for own labor and safe work conditions, allowing people who don't work in the industry to dictate what we're going to do. Even if they work in the industry, I have no right telling Amber or Maxine what to do or how to do their work. This idea that we don't know what we're doing and they would somehow not do it better is kind of funny. So we want to be aware of the rhetoric and continue to keep supporting full decriminalization. So in 2018, some of us attended the 2018 Sex Workers Summit, and we wrote a real simple statement of our anti-criminalization principles. We offer these principles to our movement as a working template for a national platform. General statement. We advocate for people impacted by labor issues, social stigma, and criminalization, and we condone any attempts at restricting our autonomy and self-determination. Recommendations for all people. Support us in our struggle for justice and human rights, and against those who would deny us access to the same services or rights because of our work. Respect us as experts in our lives without assuming we are flawed in some way. We do not want punitive intervention. Recommendations for sex workers. We insist on sex worker leadership at every level of decision-making on policies around sex work. We reserve the right to ourselves, the right to maintain our own health. We demand the right to speak, access all public channels of communication, and choose those who speak for us and to be recognized by the media, public officials, and others as authorities on our own experiences. Rights of sex workers. To make our own sexual and relationship choices without having it invalidated consent. To access social, medical, and justice service without discrimination in any form, including but not limited to gender, sexuality, race, citizenship status, or the way we choose to work. To have our choices and body autonomy respected, including the right to decline services, and to be free to work in a manner of our own choosing without any regulation that is disrespectful to us or our agency. So I wanted to tell people that on September 5th to 15th, we'll be able to purchase one of our books on Amazon that is packed with about 10 years of surveys with all this data and a lot of personal quotes and experiences of sex workers. But I want to say one thing last. Not only is the government funded this misinformation campaign, because we know they don't care about kids. That's kind of obvious, right? When they say we're creating awareness about trafficking, they're really creating stigma and violence. That's what they're doing. They're stigmatizing even victims. I think all of us at some point has been taken advantage of or something bad has happened, even if you're not a sex worker, it's just life. And when we look at how they take care of our children in state care, well, they just found them in Rhode Island, housing them in a mental hospital and not going to school for months at a time, right? So, but it's also clickbait. It's entertainment for society. It's like the Hunger Games. They can turn it on, they click. And we need to be more than their entertainment. But thank you all for joining me. And thank you.
Thank you, Bella. Yes, criminalization kills, definitely. Next up, we do have Tara Burns. And I will let Tara introduce herself.
I'm Tara Burns. I am a sex worker of a few decades in Alaska, and I also have experience as a sex trafficking survivor as a young person, both being forced into work and also, under the federal definition, working on my own on the streets, where I wasn't being forced to work, but my working conditions were much more dangerous. So I'm going to be talking to you about a lot of things, a lot more things than I had originally planned on, but we had some rearranging of things. But just kind of like a background for all of this, right? Our working conditions in the sex industry are very clearly shaped by lawmakers and by police. So police officers and our state and federal legislators have the ability to decide if our work is going to be dangerous, or if we're going to be able to work together in safety, or if we're going to be arrested for trying to report serial killers. Those are all things that are created by our state and federal policymakers and law enforcement. And when we look, we can see really clear trends in how legislation has affected our lives and our safety and the rate of us being murdered in the sex industry. So we have this whole weird, crazy Christian nationalist thing going on. I'm not going to talk about Project 2025 because I haven't read the book, but I am going to talk about some of the legislation, the state level legislation that we're seeing coming out of that community of Republican Christian nationalist legislators, which is kind of a minority, I think, of the Republican legislators at this point, but may not be for long. So we're seeing things, a lot of these bills, Maxine, can you go to the next slide? A lot of these have to do, if you hit the slideshow button too, it'll make them bigger. A lot of these up at the top there, a lot of these bills, what they're using this kind of trick of redefining things, right? So they're going to redefine pornography and make pornography mean anything from a drawing of a nipple to somebody wearing a bikini where you can see their nipples through the cloth. And then they're going to say, well, it's pornography. There's pornography on Twitter. Or they're going to redefine sex trafficking, and they're going to redefine sexual exploitation. There's so much redefinition in all of these bills. And we've seen that, right, in our community with the constant redefinitions of sex trafficking over the last few years. So we have to be very careful that we understand the legal definitions of the words that are being used, which often have different legal definitions in different states and also at the federal level. So these age verification bills usually create new definitions of online pornography that are very broad. They would include most of our escort advertising photos. They would include drawings in some cases. And so these bills are being billed as targeting porn companies, but what they do is they create a civil liability or a fine for anybody who posts pornography to the internet that is seen by a minor. So, for example, if you post a picture on Twitter that meets the definition of pornography, and you do it from a state that has that state law, you could be fined. These bills also try to get pornography websites to institute like third-party age verification databases that keep our customers' IDs, and those can and have been hacked and information leaked to the public. Another thing that we see, if we go to the next one, Maxine, happening at the federal level, and this is actually across all parties, the Democrats and the Republicans are doing this, are these expanded non-criminal definitions of sex trafficking, right? So we have this at the federal level where if a minor engages in a sex act and receives something, so this can include a minor who goes on a date with their boyfriend who's the same age and engages in a sex act and receives a free meal even, right, is sex trafficking at the federal level. And this is a definition that is part of the criminal law and also, in VAWA. And it's used primarily, right, for service providers, so that service providers can say, well, we served 100 million minor victims of sex trafficking last year. And people think that that means 100 million minors have been trafficked in the sex industry. So now we see these state laws are starting to bring in these same definitions, and we're being told that this will bring more funding into the state. But they turn around and they use these high numbers as if they are the numbers of people being actually trafficked in the sex industry. And they use that to pass broader and broader definitions of sex trafficking to get more criminal prosecutions, because everybody wants all of the sex trafficking, the actual sex trafficking cases to be prosecuted. So when they, bring this to the state legislatures and say, our service providers are reporting 100 cases of sex trafficking of a minor last year, but there were 0 prosecutions for sex trafficking of a minor. Legislators don't understand that that was probably 100 minors who were trafficked according to this non-criminal definition of sex trafficking, and that there's not actually a need to make broader and broader laws to charge sex workers with trafficking ourselves. Okay, next slide. So, and then we're also in the federal and also the state laws seeing this further criminalization of our clients. So at the federal level, we've seen that clients who agree to purchase sex from fictitious minors that the FBI is pimping out are now charged with sex trafficking at the federal level under, the 1591, the same code that actual sex traffickers are charged under, right? So, and some of those cases, you read the charging documents in some of those cases, you're like, wow, this guy is a really bad guy. It's a good thing that they caught him. And then some of them, you look at them and you're like, well, how is the guy even supposed to know that this 40-year-old cop was actually pretending that she was 17? Like, the hints that she dropped about possibly being 17 were not very clear. But broadly speaking, these bills will change the name of prostitution or solicitation to customers to sexual exploitation or to patron of a victim of sex trafficking. And under these really broad state laws, a victim of sex trafficking can basically be any sex worker in some states. And they make solicitation a more serious misdemeanor, or sometimes they make it a felony for the 3rd conviction, or sometimes they just make it a felony. And this completely alienates our clients from the police. And our clients are our first responders in cases of actual sex trafficking. If somebody is being sex trafficked and being isolated and controlled, the only person that they're ever alone with are clients. And so we need our clients to be able to call the police and report sex trafficking if a trafficking victim asks them to, without having to fear that they're going to lose their jobs, their families, and their freedom. Next one. So again, this is following federal trends. So the federal government does not regulate prostitution. However, they are regulating prostitution. And a lot of that, we'll talk in the next slides about kind of the funding streams that are creating that. But just really, really broadly, over the last 20 years, we see that states are following the federal example. They're following what the federal task force dollars are asking them to do. They're turning a lot of things that have been prostitution into promoting prostitution. And they're turning things that used to be promoting prostitution into sex trafficking. So we have sex workers in many states, and also at the federal level, we have sex workers and sex trafficking survivors who have not hurt anybody and who sometimes are working completely independently, being charged with sex trafficking for aiding or facilitating their own prostitution or for having a place of their own prostitution. And now more recently, there is a push in many states to make that a sex offender registry crime, so that if you are charged with aiding or facilitating your own prostitution, you can have a record for sex trafficking and have to register as a sex offender. Okay, next slide. So this is like this huge thing that I've been working on wrapping my head around, and I cannot explain in 10 minutes, but I'm going to do my best to kind of get pieces of it from my brain to your brain. So the Department of Homeland Security has made human trafficking. So the Department of Homeland Security is focused on defending the homeland, on terrorism, right? And one of their 12 focus areas is human trafficking. But on the ground, the definition they're using of human trafficking is prostitution, right? And what this looks like is that they will do end demand stings where they arrest customers. It looks like Homeland Security agents getting hand jobs at massage parlors and then arresting and sometimes deporting the workers. The Department of Homeland Security has a Blue campaign, which is a public awareness campaign, and it's also used to train law enforcement in how to do prostitution stings and engage in sexual contact with us and then arrest us and turn around and tell the media that they've rescued us from sex trafficking. And so in this way, you don't think that prostitution, which is a misdemeanor crime, is something that would get you on the terrorism watch list, right? But actually a group of, I think, 3 or more people organized around illegal activity is a terrorist group. Our sex worker rights groups are terrorist groups under the federal definition. And that allows them to surveil us and to violate some of our constitutional rights because we are on these federal terrorist watch lists. So then we can go to the next slide, Maxine. There's all of this federal funding, which flows through different federal offices, but pointed at sex trafficking awareness or sex trafficking services or sex trafficking police task forces through the DOJ and stuff, right? And so through that, the Department of Justice, the Office for Victims of Crimes, etc., all of these different federal offices are able to impact prostitution policy and prostitution policing on the ground. The Federal Office for Victims of Crimes has put a lot of money in Alaska. Just in the last few years, it's, I think, over $12 million into anti-trafficking services. And some of what that looks like is our, anti-trafficking task forces that lobby the government to make the laws worse, to target us more, which helps to create higher numbers of trafficking prosecutions that they can use to prop up the idea that they need more funding, right? So in this month's edition of the Anti-Trafficking Review, which will be coming out in a few weeks here, Tatiana and Ajayla and myself have an article about anti-trafficking funds in Alaska and how they've been used and how the use of them has actually inhibited or resulted in exclusion from services for some victims. Okay. And then I was asked to also talk about the Green Party platform. I love the idea of the Green Party. Like, if the Green Party didn't hate me, I would probably be voting for them. I'm just going to read you really quick some of the things that they say directly from their platform page. They say, we urge that the term sex work not be used in relation to prostitution. With the increasing conflation of trafficking, which is the violent and illegal trafficking in women and girls for forced sex with prostitution. So see that the way they use that word conflating there, with the conflation, the increasing conflation of trafficking with prostitution, it's impossible to know which is which and what violence the term sex work is masking. No source in existence knows which forms of prostitution comprise forced sex and which comprise free will or choice prostitution. And then they go on to say that they support the Swedish model, and refer to prostitution as a form of violence against women and girls throughout their thing, which is really long, and I know I've gone over time now, so I will pass it back to Amber.
Thank you, Tara. So next up, we do have Starchild, and I will let them introduce themselves. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I'm a longtime sex worker here in San Francisco, California, and also libertarian pro-freedom activist. And the two are related in that I've long had a passion for freedom. And one of the reasons I chose sex work and that appealed to me is because it gives you so much choice in terms of how you work, where you work, who you choose to see. All these things you don't typically get in most jobs where you have to report to an employer or deal with a lot of regulation and government control. Choice is good. And we have, unfortunately, a political system in this country that is just the opposite. It does not give us choice. Every 4 years we're told, oh, this is the most important election in your lifetime. You have to choose between, as South Park satirically famously put it, a douche or turd sandwich. Those are our choices. If we don't like them, too bad. And this time it's Trump and Biden, and then Trump and Harris, who we've had that history here in San Francisco. Maxine described about her, and the duopoly cartel, or two-party cartel, as I call it, is systematically failing people. It's undermining democracy in this country. And there's a number of ways that this happens, including ballot access laws. All parties except for the Republicans and Democrats have to jump through extra special hoops to get on the ballot. In many states, they can't. For about the past decade in California, we've had something called Top Two, which only allows the two top vote-getting candidates from each primary election to go on to the general election, which means usually a Republican and Democrat, but some places where it's heavily, blue or heavily red, you get two Republicans on the ballot in the general election or two Democrats, and people have no other choices unless they write somebody in, and they only count candidates for write-in votes if those candidates have specifically registered as write-in candidates and jump through a bunch of hoops to even be eligible to get write-in votes. So it's a completely rigged system in many ways. The media doesn't call them out on this. Another way that alternatives are excluded is in debates. We have, I think, maybe tonight even, I can't remember when the Harris-Trump debate is supposed to be taking place, but of course they've, once again, as is true every debate since Ross Perot ran back in the 1990s, they're shutting out the Libertarians, the Greens, all other alternative parties and independent candidates, even JFK, who was polling double digits in many states before he dropped out of the race. And that's one reason he dropped out of the race, is because they weren't letting him in the debates. They were keeping him off many state ballots. So he's out now. So we've lost another alternative. But it's only part of this is due to the voting system in this country. And there are a couple specific reforms that could help with that. One is ranked choice voting. That would allow people to list their choices in order. So, for example, if you voted for president and you put somebody else as your first pick who's not one of the two-party cartel candidates, basically in each round of counting the results, the candidate with the lowest vote total would get dropped. And then it would go to your next choice pick. So if that candidate didn't, until somebody gets 50%. It's also called instant runoff voting. You can look that up on Wikipedia and more information about that. Another more fundamental reform that I think would go a lot further towards ending the duopoly two-party cartel that denies us choice is proportional representation, which would be for state legislatures or any multi-seat body, so that basically each political party would get a percentage of seats in that body proportional to the percentage of the vote that they got. So if the Libertarian Party got 20% of the vote in a district, then they'd get, or not in a district, but in say for Congress, then they'd get 20% of the congressional seats. That would probably require a constitutional amendment, so it's not on the near-term horizon. But many other countries have this, and the ones that do tend to have better true multi-party democracies than the United States does. There's also the issue of the media, and the media has played a huge role in upholding all these restrictions and exclusions, and making people think like they have to vote for the douche or the turd sandwich. I live in Nancy Pelosi's district. She got elected first to the House of Representatives back in the 1980s. And since the very first election she ran in, she's not debated any of her challengers, not even the Republicans. And the media don't call her out for this. She just keeps getting reelected year after year because too many people just think, oh, I have to, check that box, that Democrat or that Republican box. And San Francisco is like 80% Democrat, so she always gets it. But people think like, well, I would vote for somebody else. I'd love to, but I'd be wasting my vote. And this myth of wasted vote is perhaps the biggest thing that's stopping us from actually defeating the duopoly and having more real democracy. I believe it was Audre Lorde who said, actually, no, I don't think it was Audre Lorde. I should have written that down. But someone said the most common way that people give up power is by assuming that they don't have any. And that is very much the case with voting. Each election, there's always the possibility for us to elect a Libertarian or a Green or some other alternative party candidate that has better positions on sex work rights and a bunch of other issues than the two-party cartel candidates do. But people think, oh, I'm going to waste my vote because those candidates can't win, and I don't want to waste my vote. Voting's too important. But here's the thing. Your one vote is not going to decide the outcome of any presidential election in the United States, a country of like 340 million people. Realistically, it's just not going to happen. You have a better chance of being hit by lightning or run over by a bus or winning the lottery than you do your vote changing who's next in the White House. The alternative party candidates that you might be considering have a better chance of getting elected president than the chances are that your one vote will change the outcome. So what it's really doing is like voting in an opinion poll. And when you vote in an opinion poll, if you get asked, for example, like, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream, vanilla, chocolate, or strawberry, and your favorite is actually strawberry, but you think most people are probably going to say vanilla or chocolate, are you going to answer vanilla or chocolate just because you think that's what most other people are going to say? No, but unfortunately, a lot of people do vote that way. They think that like, well, because most people are voting Democrat or Republican, I have to if I want my vote to count. But again, mathematically, that's not the way it works. Your vote actually has a greater proportional impact if you add it to someone with a smaller total, say 1 added to 10 million being a greater proportional difference than 1 added to 100 million. In either case, you're realistically not going to elect the next president with your vote. Even if you lived in Florida in the year 2000, when there was a once-in-a-lifetime close election between the two cartel candidates, Bush and Gore, you would have needed to convince like 500 other people to change their votes in order for your vote to change the outcome and who gets in the White House. So it's really important to understand this, because if people understood this and just stepped outside this mental box, we could really change this system. And we could get then a lot of more ideas, including around sex work, into the dialogue. If the Libertarians were seen as having a realistic chance of getting elected, even if we didn't ultimately win, more people would see that, yeah, our political party stands fully for decriminalization. It's in our platform. We respect the right of sex workers and clients to consensually exchange services without being criminalized. And this stance, like the rest of libertarianism and what the party stands for generally, is based on the non-aggression principle, which is the idea that each person has the right to live as they choose, so long as they don't initiate force or fraud against others. And this is a philosophy that respects everyone's basic human dignity and autonomy, which I think is very important for individual sex workers. We've long said, consent matters, but it doesn't just matter when it comes to sex. Really, consent matters in all aspects of our lives. And I would encourage people to check out, there's a great site on the non-aggression principle, its history, ideas, and spirituality around it, the nonaggressionprinciple.com. I will put that into the Q&A for people to see. And I'm at about 9 minutes. I'm gonna end a little bit early here, so we can give others more chance to ask questions and Chase more chance to speak and to answer questions. So thank you.
Okay, my unmute button would not unstick. Thank you, Starchild. That was very enlightening. I wanted to say that quote is actually from Alice Walker. And there's another quote that kind of goes along that. If it doesn't matter how strong your opinions are, if you don't use your power for positive change, you are indeed part of the problem. And that is Coretta Scott King. As you can see, Maxine has just put up the poll.
We do have a question, so I wanted to unmute the attendee to be able to ask their question. Their name is Annalie LF. Annalie, are you ready to ask your question?
Thank you. Nice to meet you all. My name is Anaí. I'm Mexican, and I'm here. I'm sex worker. I work in Mexico. I talked before with Bella, but my English is not the best. So I'm also a film director, and my producer Gabby, she's from United States, and she will ask the question for me because my English is not very good. So Gabby, you are here, you can ¿podrías alzar la mano, Gaby, para que vean quién eres tú y que te dejen hablar? So if you will mute to Gaby for she can ask the question for me, I will appreciate a lot. Thank you for all.
Hi, yes. Hi, thank you for giving us a chance for question and answers. Yes, I work with Anaí. She's a filmmaker, and I'm helping her produce a film about sex work. Anaí is also a sex worker, and she's doing it from a personal perspective. But we wanted to ask, Anaí was recently granted a artist residence to go to the United States and explore these topics. So hopefully there'll be some chance to connect with everybody in person. That would be awesome. But yeah, we wanted to know if you all had any plans to maybe like have any kind of presence at the UN General Assembly that's coming up in New York.
Oh, do tell us about that. You know, we wrote an op-ed about the UN and their recent bad about the special sex trafficking rapporteur and how she came up with some of that really horrible pejorative language similar to what Tara described as the Green Party's position. And yeah, maybe we should all go do Stop the Raids in New York. When is it, Gabby?
Yes, because there is a protocol, the protocol of Palermo, and that protocol don't make a difference between sex work and traffic. And I don't know if you have any, if you want plan to try to do something about the protocol of Palermo or about the Fosta Sesta, do something in the Senate, because we have the plan to like give to bueno, la ONU, a la ONU en New York or in the Senate in Washington, ¿cómo se dice, Gaby? Pliego petitorio?
Petition.
give a petition. I don't know if you want to. Les podría decir que si se quieren sumar a la escritura de un pliego petitorio para entregarlo y pedir que se reforme la fosta cesta o el protocolo de Palermo, porfis, Gaby.
Yeah, like doing something like a demonstration or something like that is totally something that we would love to take part in. Anai really wants to create a petition to submit at the assembly. So if anybody is interested in helping out with that, or you know, joining forces on authoring the petition, that would be really great.
Yes, for try to do something about the fosta cesta law, because the fosta cesta law not just affect sex workers in the United States, affects people in all and different parts of the world, because Facebook, Twitter, Instagram are social media from the United States, and are ruled by the government of United States, and that rape or human rights as a sex worker in Mexico, because in Mexico the sex work is not illegal, but in the United States, yes, and that limits us for speak freely of our rights in Mexico. And for that reasons, I'm trying to make a petition with a lot of workers around the world and from the United States, to give it to the Senate for ask them to derogate or reform the fosta cesta law. And I don't know if you want to write this petition with us and give this petition with us. And I will go to United States in October, to New York and Washington for give these petitions. I don't believe in the politics. I don't believe in the Democrats. Also, I don't believe in the Republicans. They are a duopolio. They are very fascist, and they don't recognize, don't make any difference between sex work and traffic of persons. For that reasons, I don't have any hope to change something, but I want to try it. And I hope if you can help us to write this petition and give these petitions, I will appreciate a lot. And I don't know if you could understand me, because I
Yes.
tell before I can speak a lot of English.
No, you're great, Anahi. Do you know the specific dates for the General Assembly meeting that you're talking about, where you'd like to present this petition?
I don't think they let us in at the assembly, because in the ONU are very fascist person. But I think I maybe just given to someone outside of the United Nations. The assembly is starts I think the 10th of September, and it's all September. It'll be a lot of meetings there, and but I don't know who is the person who I can give this petition, because you know the United Nations are very fascist person, and they ignore the rights of sex workers. And for that reason, I like to know if somebody here knows someone in the United Nations who can recite this petition for reform the protocol of Palermo. I don't know who say that in English, protocolo de Palermo.
Yeah, you're talking about the Palermo Protocol. Yeah, it's the root of all evil. It's at the UN. It's what started all of these, renaming us, as sex traffickers and sex trafficking victims, like they're plantation owners or something, that they get to rename us. And so I'm going to hook you up with some of the sex worker rights people in New York. And yes, we would love to co-write, a petition, to stand there. Maybe some of us can fly over to the UN. We can, make a day or two of it and hand out those flyers that we're condemning them for even entertaining, this renaming us business. We could do a press release when we're in New York, or work with New York people to get some New York press and, put our position on the map and, raise our hand and say, you know what, we're not down for being renamed. We are not your slaves. You are not a plantation owner. You do not get to rename us and define our work without our permission. So thank you so much, Gabby and Annalie, for being on the call today, because it just really makes a big, huge difference to to hear from what the concerns are, because those are concerns that we have.
And I put my email address in the Q&A, so please email me too, or send me your email address, and I'd be happy to help write language for a petition.
Yeah, my email also. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I think, Annalie, that Bella has your email address. And so I'm hoping maybe Bella could send an introductory email to you and to the whole Stop the Raids gang. And then you could let us know what dates you're going to be in the country and where you're going to be, so that we can help to network you with groups wherever you're going to be.
Thank you very much. It will be great.
Thank you. Who's next?
So I believe Chase is next. So we're very happy to have with us an actual presidential candidate today, who is the nominee of the Libertarian Party, the leading alternative party in the United States by most metrics in terms of number of registered voters, percentage of the vote in recent national elections, et cetera. And we have been having some controversies in our party the last years, and it wasn't clear at all that this year we were going to get a good nominee that I could feel really comfortable about. And so I am so delighted that Chase and his running mate, Mike Termont, got the nomination. I think they're the best ticket that realistically we could have nominated this year. And I think Chase is very supportive of our agenda, and he's been a longtime peace activist even before he was a libertarian, and someone who's been involved in his community where he lives in Atlanta, Georgia, out and gay, and outspoken in defending the underdog in a whole bunch of different issues, and championing people's rights and freedom. So I'm very happy that he's been able, and the campaign's made time for him to be here with us today. Go ahead, Chase. And you have, I believe, 10 minutes. Is that correct? And then we're going to take Q&A. Is that right, Maxine? Okay. And you have to unmute yourself, Shay. There you go. Great.
Yeah, thanks. Well, first off, thank you for having me. I want to just kind of start off with where our party stands on sex work and kind of go into my personal experiences so that I can give you guys a little bit of insight as to where I came from. So our party's platform is very short and sweet. We don't get a lot into the weeds, but we do have a platform plank on sex work, which reads: the Libertarian Party supports the decriminalization of prostitution. We assert the right of consenting adults to provide sexual services to clients for compensation, and the right of clients to purchase sexual services from consenting sex workers. Point blank, we believe that your body is your body, and you have the right to use it however you want to. Zero judgment here. And frankly, I think much of what we've seen from anti-sex worker legislation, anti-prostitution legislation, is a holdover from the puritanical founding of this country. Like, it kind of comes from a place of this kind of weird moral, whatever kind of Christianity. And I'm a Christian myself, but I'm 100% supportive of sex workers and their rights to do what they want to do with their body, and to be protected as much as possible from harm. And much of that has to do with decriminalizing prostitution, because when we criminalize it, you create an entire black market that increases the propensity for violence in that marketplace. And so decriminalization, first and foremost, protects the rights and protects the well-being of sex workers across the country. And that is something that our party has stood for a long, long time. And as its standard bearer in 2024, I will continue to support that notion that people should be able to own their own body, and that an open and free market is a safer market both for the consumer and for the provider. And that includes sex work. It's no different than any other marketplace in that effect. Now, just to give you a little bit of my background, as Starchild mentioned, I am out and gay. I have, I live in the city of Atlanta, and, I know many sex workers. I know many people who have been in the industry in the past, are currently in the industry, I worked in gay bars and go-go bars. I know plenty of people who utilize the sex work marketplace to help them survive and to help them thrive in their lives. And they did so as completely consenting and willing participants. So I've also seen the bad side of sex work because of the black market nature of this, where people have been exploited. And unfortunately, law enforcement conflates those two things far too often. And that leads to us not seeing the forest from the trees. It's way harder to treat those who are being exploited when you act as if all people who are entering into sex work are being exploited, which just is not the case. It's not the truth. And it's something that actually harms those who are consentingly and willingly engaging in this marketplace. And it also makes it way harder for those who are being exploited to have their story being brought to light. It makes people more afraid to bring their story to light. And it makes it way harder for us to punish those who are actually doing the wrongdoing of exploiting people and exploiting their bodies and exploiting their labor, just as it is in any other industry. You make it harder for whistleblowers to blow the whistle when you criminalize their behavior. And that's just the plain truth of it. And so, I know people who have worked in varying stages of the industry, from being, a sex worker, working out of the go-go bar, to people who work in pornography, to people who have been professional escorts for years. One of my best friends, first coming out into the gay life of Atlanta, was a professional dom who was the first person who taught me about protecting my drink and making sure that I knew who I was going home with, and understanding like the most safe practices if you're going to be cruising around looking for sex in your 20s, particularly if you're gay. And I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful that somebody who had that relevant experience was there to identify me as somebody who might be taken advantage of and say, here's the way you prevent that, because I'm actually in this industry and I have to do this on a regular basis. So happy that person's in my life. I do want to give a little anecdote about this campaign. Me campaigning for president, I've traveled to all 50 states. And I was in an event here in Atlanta with a friend of mine who had, he brings everybody across all of gay Atlanta. Every stripe of the rainbow comes to his parties. And so we're there. I'm passing out campaign literature like, hey, guys, I'm running for president. I'm the first LGBTQ candidate that's trying to run all across the country. And a young man walked up to me named Toby, and he asked me a series of questions. And in this series of questions, he just happened to say, well, how do you feel about sex work? And I said, well, if you're an adult, your body's your body. Do what you want to do with it. It's not my job to regulate it. Certainly, I don't think the government's going to best regulate sex work. I think sex workers can best regulate sex work. And I think that's really where that lies. And let's just keep the government the heck out of it, so long as you're not hurting anybody and everybody's consenting, right? Months later, I was at an event in Miami, Florida, and that same young man came to my event, and he kind of outed himself as a sex worker. He's like, I asked you all those other questions, really didn't care so much. I put the sex worker question in the middle of that because I didn't want you to know I was a sex worker. I didn't want you to bias your answer around what I did for a living. But you answered exactly the way you needed to answer. And so I'm coming here to support you. He donated money. He had friends donate money. I recognize the human dignity in all work, sex work being no different. And as a politician, I come from a way more immoral world than any sex worker does. I come from the world of politics, which is far more immoral and far more full of criminals than the sex worker industry. And so I'm somebody who, as I navigate the waters and the extremely immoral and compromised world of electoral politics, I'm going to do my best to represent the values that I think need to be heard. And that involves supporting the bodily autonomy and dignity of all people. And that includes sex workers. And that's why I'm here, is to hear your stories, to hear your insight about what matters to you, and to hear what you think needs to be done at the federal level to decriminalize your industry as much as possible, to remove stigma from your industry as much as possible. And so I'm thankful for the testimony that y'all have provided here. I'm thankful for knowing Starchild, who is a radical activist out there in San Francisco, who is themselves a sex worker, and allowed me to be able to come and speak to this audience. And so I'm just kind of thankful that y'all gave me the opportunity to kind of speak my piece and kind of tell you where I'm coming from. And I hope to earn your vote. If you're in a blue state like California, You know, you can vote for me. Don't feel out of fear. As Starchild said, it's very hard to sway the election with just one vote. And if you're in Alaska, which I know a couple of other panelists have mentioned being up in Alaska, you have a ranked choice ballot. You can put the pro-sex worker candidate first and your lesser of two evil anti-sex worker candidate as your second choice in the ballot, and signify that you want somebody who's going to actually listen to your industry, to listen to the stories that are being told, and actually have some relevant, you know, some friends and colleagues that they know who are in that industry and can get true insight on the ground. So I hope to earn your vote, but I'm going to continue to listen to y'all and answer any questions you have, or if you have any other questions for the panelists, I look forward to them answering it as well, because I think it's an important conversation to have. And as an out and proud gay man, I think we need to destigmatize sexuality as much as possible. It's a human function of just reality for many people. You know, shout out to my ace friends. We do have asexuals out in the world, but you know, by and large, sexuality is, and even for asexual, sexuality is a part of your identity, whether you practice or not. So, you know, I just want people to destigmatize that as much as possible, support bodily autonomy, and, you know, let people be people. And that's kind of where I come from. But thank you guys for giving me the chance. If you want to check out my website, it is votechaseoliver.com. Go there, check out the platform. We are going to be adding, I hope, sex worker specific language to the platform. In general, you know, it's part of the Libertarian Party platform. We might get a little bit more in depth. And of course, we look forward to hearing maybe some policy language that might need to be added. But thank you.
In the book, the policy recommendations are in the book.
Yes, I need to get a copy of that book at some point. If you go to the website, there
September
is a mailing address. If you send me the book, I'll read it. I right now have 8 books that I have to read that have been given to me by different people, a varying array of topics. I'm going to read all of them, even if it's after November, and I'm going to do podcasts where I review all of those books. So if you send me that book, there will be a podcast where I review that book.
Awesome. Maxine, there's a hand up.
Question for you, Chase. Thanks for being here. So a lot of the sex worker nation is involved in activities that have to do with what's called harm reduction. So they're, you know, they've got public funding of different sorts, and they're out there on the street doing you know, condom distribution, syringe exchange, giving out safe sex information. And so I mean, I know that traditionally the libertarian parties are not supporting like public money going for a lot of things and like harm reduction. So I just kind of want to know what your position was around that.
So I support harm reduction locally in lots of different areas. You know, as a libertarian, I don't think the federal government should be funding a lot of things. Okay, so harm reduction strategies and federal funding. As a libertarian, there's not a lot of things I think should be really funded at the federal level. I think most funding for anything, if it's going to be government funded, should be done at the local or community level as much as possible. That being said, I absolutely support harm reduction strategies. I think it's an excellent way to make a difference in your community, even if I think government might inefficiently be funding it, putting regulatory hurdles and red tape in the way. Any kind of harm reduction strategy is good. I'm a big fan of a group called Shred the Stigma out in Oklahoma City. They pass out free Narcan, fentanyl testing strips, condoms, clean needles, all sorts of things to reduce harm, mostly for communities suffering from addiction. But in doing so, they have saved over 1,000 lives with Narcan alone, just with the Narcan that they passed out. Ideally, I think we should be able to fund that at the community level without using government as a mechanism to do those things. But absent that perfect world environment for me, which, you know, I don't live in my perfect world environment right now. I don't think any of us do. I would like to see harm reduction be done more at the community level, more at the local level, because I don't think at the federal level, they know what strategies are needed for, say, for San Francisco or for Alaska or for Atlanta or for anywhere else. That should be done more at a community level that knows the needs that are stressed by that community in particular. So that way, if resources are going to be run through government, it's I think the local government's the most efficient way possible. But again, in a perfect world, in my libertarian ideal world, we would just facilitate that without the need of a government. We would just put the money where it needs to go towards organizations to, provide mutual and direct aid and harm reduction just that way. But yeah, absolutely, I'm supportive of those strategies. I just don't think the feds are the best people to facilitate it.
Tara's got her hand up.
So I have two questions. And I'll start with the easy one. If you are elected, will you do anything to change the National Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative?
Yes. So the biggest thing that I think libertarians can do in order with regards to sex work and with regards to trafficking is changing the way we actually handle this altogether. As other panelists, yourself included, have mentioned, the correlation or the trying to blend the ideas of prostitution and human trafficking together are ridiculous. I don't know specifically exactly the legislation you're mentioning, but if it's something that is basically being used to identify and criminalize sex workers, that's bullshit. But what is a specific legislation?
So the National Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative was instituted. You might be more familiar with the term fusion centers, which are kind of related, right? But it was instituted after 9/11 to facilitate the communication of different law enforcement agencies within each state about people who are engaging in non-criminal behavior that could be pre-operational to terrorism, including prostitution,
well,
or including being Muslim, right?
Yeah, well, anything coming out of 9/11 is much of it is fear-based policy that was made kind of as the country was kind of freaking out. And let government never let a good crisis go to waste to abscond with our liberty and to kind of violate our privacy. It seems like this is something that was done in the name of protection, right? Hey, we'll let our law enforcement agencies talk to each other more. But what it does is it creates almost this Minority Report style pre-crime kind of thinking. Like if they're tracking non-criminal activity for the purpose of saying, well, this might lead to crime. Yeah, that's kind of beyond the pale gross. Frankly, if I could wave a magic wand, I would do away with the DHS altogether. I think the Homeland Security Department has wholesale been a violation of liberty, and a lot of what they do could be folded into DOJ or the Department of Defense without all these extra agencies that violate our liberty. ICE is another one that does the exact same thing. Of course, that criminalizes all kinds of stuff. Anyway, yes, the short answer is absolutely. As a libertarian, that sounds shady as shit. Pardon my French.
Yeah. So there have been a number of congressional hearings about this, and my next question is about, the whole machine of the federal administration targeting sex workers through the DOJ and through, the FBI and Homeland Security and, the OVC, which is part of the DOJ, of course. And these law enforcement task forces and these community agency task forces. What is your plan if you're elected to stop or change that machine? And would you direct the Department of Justice to back research on sex worker-led investigations into our working conditions?
So short answer is, if I were elected president, much of the DOJ would just be wholesale gone. There'd be wholesale scaling back of much of what that agency does, because frankly, it's too large and too expensive and too intrusive into our lives. This would be no different with regards to invading the industry of sex work. We don't need a giant federal apparatus to fight sex work or to even fight the exploitation that can happen within the industry. I think, again, that needs to be happening more at a local level. That we don't need a federal task force to basically crack down upon this industry. I think we need to be more laissez-faire when it comes to sex work, certainly at the federal level. But with regards to investigating working conditions, I absolutely think one of the purposes of the Justice Department, one of the purposes as a minarchist that I think government should have is to protect the civil liberties of people. And if you're being exploited through your labor, there should be absolutely a mechanism to where the DOJ and other agencies can defend your civil liberties from being exploited. Again, I don't know if that's best facilitated through the DOJ federally or if that's something that a state should be handling. But in any instance where the Department of Justice can investigate wrongdoings for anybody in any industry, regardless of working conditions, that's kind of something that I would like to see. But yeah, I would like to strip down the federal government as much as possible to its minimal existence. And so much of the responsibilities that we are currently seeing in the hands of the federal government would be sent back to the states or the localities in many of these instances. And as part of that streamlining process, we'd of course be doing away with a lot of these task forces that you're mentioning.
I see Bella has her hand up, and I don't know if Tara's was up for another question or not, but maybe Bella, if you want to ask.
Yeah, so I got a couple questions. So first of all, I know you probably don't know this. You're not an expert. I'm not an expert on climate change, but I am an expert on this. So Hope versus United States 1913 Supreme Court law says that the federal government cannot regulate prostitution. It's left up to the states. And this is why they invented trafficking, because now they can do it federally. The FBI was created over prostitution. So I want to know, on day one, if you become president, will you give sex workers protection for hate crimes? We're not covered under hate crime legislation. Doxing us, which is outing our legal names. And actually in New Zealand, it's illegal and you can be arrested and get a fine for it. And I want to know if you understand what affirmative defense is, because they want the public to think that, they're helping these victims. There is no trickle-down effect. They keep all the money for their offices and fundraising. We can't even get a rescue sandwich or pair of flip-flops when we go to jail. So affirmative defense means they arrest you, you end up on the news, and when you go to court and say you're a victim, they can't prosecute you. And some states make you prove you're a victim. And I think you understand with the internet, by then they've ruined your life. The traumatic arrest, this is the one thing no one's ever going to forget. You can steal cars, you can be on drugs, you can do a lot of things and come back from it. But this is the one thing that society does not forgive you for. So I know you have a lot to learn about the subject, and we'd like to engage with you, especially before you put things up on your website. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the first off, doxing should be, I support privacy rights. As far as hate crime legislation, I am somebody who thinks that all crimes are done out of some sort of hate or malice. I think we can create stiffer penalties for certain crimes. I don't, the designation of, I think if somebody commits violence against you, whether it is because you are a sex worker or because you're a woman or because you're a Christian or because you're a gay man or whatever it is, it's still being done out of malice. And so I support defending people's liberty. I don't know if I support creating a whole new designation of crime.
Well, there's already hate crimes. It's against religion, it's against race. We're the only ones not included in it. LGBT hate crimes, trans hate crimes, we're the only population that are not included under hate crimes legislation. Yeah,
and philosophically, I think crimes against sex workers should be treated just as vociferously as you would against any other crime against anybody else. I don't know if we need to create designations for anybody for hate crimes. Does that make sense? Like, I think all crime should be treated, understanding that whoever's committing it is doing it with a certain amount of malice and hatred. We can create stiffer penalties for certain crimes, but I don't think, as a gay man, if somebody attacks me and harms me, I don't care if they do it because I'm gay or if they want my wallet. Either way, it's a crime against me, is kind of my viewpoint. And so I view sex work, any violence against a sex worker is wrong, whether it is done because they are a sex worker or because that person just happened to pick you randomly down the street. It is a crime of malice and a crime of violence, if that makes sense. But philosophically, I absolutely support the right of sex workers to be protected from violence. I think it's ridiculous. One of the reasons why I oppose the criminalization of prostitution to begin with is because in that industry, when you criminalize it, it creates a higher propensity for people to be attacked and harmed, because the perpetrators know, hey, they're not going to go report the crime because they don't want to get arrested for prostitution. And so it's far easier for someone to take advantage of a sex worker than it is for anybody else, because their industry is not criminalized. If I go assault a fast food worker, they're going to go to the police and say that guy punched me while I was serving food. But if you attack a prostitute, if you attack somebody who is engaging in sex work, you know, that perpetrator knows that person is less likely to go to the police because now they're worried about themselves being criminalized. And I think that's one of the crime. That's one of the biggest shames of the way we stigmatize sex work, is because it allows for that violence to come to the surface. But yes, I would absolutely welcome any input into our policy team. I do have a policy team that is helping to create sex worker specific language. And of course, I would welcome your input into that. And yes, please send me the book. Again, I don't know how to stress this enough. Send me the book because I will read it. It's votechaseoliver.com.
We have started a fundraising campaign to be able to start our next litigation against the state of California to injunct 647B, which is the anti-prostitution law here. So you can donate to that campaign so we can afford a lawyer. Do subscribe to Tara Substack. She's got some great, she's our researcher on the spot. So let's see, I'm just looking for any other questions to wrap up. I will be posting it on the YouTube channel, the Sex Worker Nation YouTube channel. And
if you send an email to info@votechaseoliver.com, that goes to me and the top people in my campaign. And so we can make sure any information gets passed along. So just again, info@votechaseoliver.com. If you want to send any resources you have, any literature to look at, any policy language, we're happy to take a look at it and the Oliver Tremont campaign.
awesome. I'm going to allow you to talk now, Gabby. I found the button. Oh, you
It's always that button we got to find, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a million questions, but due to time constraints, I'm going to just keep it around harm reduction. I'm a former libertarian. I do understand the principles behind less government in our lives. But I also have run an outreach program for the last 7 years, and I understand community needs. If we stopped federal funding, people will die, because local funding, even county funding, and sometimes even state funding is nowhere near adequate. And to give a quick example, 2 weeks ago, I had to take somebody I was advocating for into the Pennsylvania State Police Department to make them file a missing children's report for her 12-year-old child, where there was strong suspicion of child sex trafficking. At first, they didn't want to do the report, and then they did the report. So, of course, like, hey, we need resources. I live in Westmoreland County, a little over an hour outside of Pittsburgh. Our public transportation is shit. There is nowhere I can walk to and get public transportation to get to any resources. I also live in a food desert, so I understand what it's like to live in a rural community without access to a vehicle, because thanks to criminalization, I can't get a car loan. So rural areas don't have funding. The state police informed me that they had a lot of funding for sex trafficking specifically. So the funding they gave, or the resources they gave me that they have with this funding, was the Children and Youth Services, which does nothing but take people's children off of them. They do very little to protect people here in Western Pennsylvania. And the rest of the resources were for the Pennsylvania State Police, which live about 20 minutes from where the parents and the child, who is now home safe, live. So we're not talking about like very far. So the state police have all these resources. So they tell me to call 211 for any other resources, which is Pennsylvania's helpline. The closest resource for sex trafficking to my rural county is 227 miles away. And they only take clients if you come to their county and stay there for the duration of your mental health treatment. So you have to pay for a hotel to go there. So here we have no resources. And it's not just simply for sex trafficking. It is the same thing with domestic violence. It is the same thing with drug users who want support. So basically, how would you make a transition where removing the federal funding would not cause the most vulnerable communities to die in the process?
Well, thank you for the question. You know, when I talk about, you know, I wish I could wave the libertarian magic wand and make it happen all at once. What we're talking about is a gradual movement away from federal funding for these things and block granting that money back to states and localities, meaning that the money wouldn't disappear. It's just that the facilitator of those funds would be block granted back to states or localities to be able to manage. And in the long run, as a libertarian, I would like to see the state fully removed from that apparatus. You know, you saying like, well, you know, the state requires you or the county requires you to stay here for a time period that requires me to get a hotel room to access these services. Well, when you start using services outside fully of the scope of government and your community organizing away from the monopoly of force and from the red tape and the bureaucracy of government, we can more easily facilitate helping people directly. Now, that's a philosophical argument. I recognize that that's not a day one thing that can happen. But what we can do if I'm elected day one is start taking that funding that is currently being facilitated and parsed out by the federal government and just sending it back to the states to where it's really their responsibility to kind of parse that funding out, if at all, based on the 9th and 10th Amendment. My purpose in being president would be to get our federal government back in line with where it should be constitutionally, which leaves much, if not most, of governance out of the hands of a federal government into the hands of the states, or the best to local individuals via the 9th and 10th Amendment. So that's why philosophically I think we need to move beyond those things. But we would do anything in a gradual manner. Social Security, for instance. I'm a libertarian. I don't think Social Security is something that's really a valuable system personally. I think younger workers like myself should be able to invest in retirement on their own. But I also know that my parents live on a fixed income. And if we like pulled the rug out from people who live on a fixed income, we'd be in a really, really screwy environment. And so what we as libertarians have to do is to recognize that we didn't get to state control of retirement accounts like Social Security overnight. We're not going to peel away from it overnight. And so we have to look at how can we gradually move ourselves away from state control in a way that provides the least amount of harm possible. Recognizing there's never going to be no harm from doing that, but I am trying to be as mindful as possible. And if elected, would try to facilitate ourselves away from federal control and more to state and local control with the least amount of harm being done, if that makes sense.
Thanks so much. So we've got one last question. This is Kaylee. Kaylee, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question. Go ahead.
Hi, Chase. So I would like to know if you support universal basic income and also what your thoughts are on increasing affordable housing.
Yeah, so the UBI question first. I'm a follower of Milton Friedman, who was a big negative income tax guy. If we could wave the magic wand and replace like all general welfare and entitlements and all those things and turn it into a UBI, I think it would be more efficient. I don't think that's ever going to happen. It would always be a UBI built on top of everything else. So principally, I don't necessarily support it. Maybe not from the federal level. Again, I know some cities have experimented with it. Maybe see what comes out of that in terms of like a laboratory of innovation. It creates some proof of concept. But generally, it's not something I'm super supportive of at the moment. I'm sorry, the second half of your question was about
It's about housing.
Housing, of course. That's why I didn't think of it, because I was thinking about sex worker stuff. Housing, the first thing we can do is get zoning requirements out of the way. So much of what the housing crisis is caused by is local zoning regulations that prevent low income or high density housing from being built. Not necessarily something you can do too much from the federal government level, other than being someone shouting from the bully pulpit. Here in Atlanta, obviously, it is a huge issue here in this city, affordable housing. I've been somebody who's been very supportive of changing zoning requirements to even create transitional housing, what I call tiny house villages, where you build, several small dwellings with shipping containers in a lot to allow people to have transitional housing off of the streets. Private organization can facilitate this transitional housing until you get yourself in the ability to move somewhere else, then you move someone in there. But really the biggest problem with this are NIMBYs. NIMBY liberals are the worst about this. Like, people who typically vote Democrat and they vote with the left, they say they love the poor, but when it comes to approving low income or high density zoning in their area, they absolutely oppose it with like every fiber of their being, as if they're like being assaulted. I always tell the NIMBYs this: you have two choices. You can either build, high density housing in your area, or you can continue to have a homeless population in your area. Those are really your two options. You're forcing people in the streets when you're not building housing. What affects your property values more, right? Like, what's gonna affect your gentrified pricing more, right? So from the bottom of my heart, I absolutely oppose NIMBYism. And from the local level, I will always fight to remove these restrictions to make more housing available. I also think, and this is a big thing, we are due for a housing bubble to burst. We have been pumping up federally the housing market so much over the last, since 2008. We've repeated the cycle that got us into the 2008 burst. The thing we do not need to do when the bubble bursts this next time is bail out the big fat cats on Wall Street. We do not bail them out. We let them fail. We let their resources be liquidated and reallocated in the marketplace to better facilitate it. And you're going to see more and more, real estate organizations coming on line, as opposed to centralizing it to 2 or 3 banks. You're going to break that down into a lot of smaller resources, which is better for the marketplace. So those are the two things we can do to support housing. Support ending NIMBYism in your local area, supporting more ending zoning requirements that prevent high density housing from being built. And then secondly, when it does go tits up, and it will go belly up at some point. When it does, we do not bail out the fat cat bankers. We let them fail and we let them fall. And then we pick up the pieces and we build back better.
Awesome. I just really appreciate everybody's participation and your time, Chase, for spending some time with us. I think we've all benefited from this discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to wrap up and end this webinar today, and thank all the attendees and the participants for coming, today, and, being with us, and keeping our interest out front there, because if, we're not fighting for us, nobody's going to fight for us. And so we're here to fight for us because it's important. So I'll just let, if any of the other panelists, Bella or Amber, Starchild or Tara, you guys want to have last word?
I just put it in the Q&A, but I'll just mention for everybody, I have a meetup group, meetup.com/decriminalize. It's for, any future events, this kind of thing can get posted there. I encourage people to join it. It's good visibility for our movement on Meetup. Initially, I had some issues with Meetup, maybe not wanting to allow, even though it didn't specifically say prostitution, but they have allowed it, and I'm, pretty clear in the description of the group that it is talking about decriminalizing prostitution. So I think that's a good, Meetup tends to be pretty visible. That's where we get most of our local new attendees for Libertarian Party meetings, is through our LP Meetup. So meetup.com/decriminalize. I encourage everyone to join that. I am at Starchild SF on X. Welcome to follow or connect with me there, or email realreform@earthlink.net. And thanks especially to our immigrant guest. I wasn't quite sure if Anahi, your name looked like, or you were saying Anali, but you and Gabi or Gabe, thanks so much for joining us. And I look forward to working with you on a petition to the UN.
Thank you so much, Starchild. Tara.
I just want to thank Maxine for bringing us all together here today. And thank you everybody for coming. I love that we are doing this. We haven't had this with past presidential elections, and we are stronger together. And I hope that next election we'll have 2 or 3 times as many sex workers presenting. And will be so important that the Democrat and Republican and Green Party candidates will come and try to win our votes too.
Awesome. Thank you. Bella.
Thank you. From small states, many of us that do policy work and are doing lobbying understand we don't win the first time. It's, we don't go in there expecting to win. But when you're in a public hearing and it's recorded and it becomes part of public records, they can't say later they didn't know the harm they did. And much like Alaska, Rhode Island, it only takes 30 or 40 votes to win or lose in local elections. And sadly, you want to vote for people who aren't in your district, but that's how sometimes we can have the power. You start voting them out. Thank you.
Thank you, Billy. Yes, all those down ballot races. Down ballot races means that it's not only the presidential candidate, it's the congressional candidates that are running. It's your local mayor who's running. You have state representatives that are running. You have local council members and board of supervisors who are running, and you should get out there and go ask them, what is their position on decriminalizing sex work? I myself belong to the Harvey Milk LGBT Democratic Club, and we have a questionnaire, and decriminalizing sex work is on that questionnaire for every single candidate. We don't care if you're running for dog catcher. You're going to get asked about what your position is on decriminalizing prostitution. So if I don't see any more hands, I just want to encourage everybody to get out there. Starchild, you had one last thing you wanted.
Just one quick thing you just reminded me, actually. I'm not sure if he's on the call or not, but there's a guy named Keith Friedman running for mayor here in San Francisco. He expressed interest in coming on the call. I sent him the link and told him I'd give him a shout out. He's expressed support for decriminalizing prostitution. He's not one of the front runners, but again, your vote, even for mayor here, is probably not going to change the outcome. So encourage people to vote for who they think is actually the best candidate. And he might be that person for me. We'll see.
I'm going to unmute you, Keith. You got 2 minutes. On your mark, get set, go. Unmute yourself, Keith, and tell us.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
yep.
thank you.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm running for mayor. I posted in a link to a letter to the editor to the San Francisco Chronicle. They wouldn't publish an op-ed, and they made me squeeze it down into 200 words, but it's there. Starchild and I disagree a little bit. I'm more on the legalization side, and I understand where you're all coming from and how having the government involved at all can be a terrible thing. But part of my issue is that, we have to kind of sell this to the public, and I think it's going to be an easier pill to swallow if we talk to people locally about legalization rather than decriminalization.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. We're going to wrap up. And
I thought he said he supported decrim, but it's semantics to some extent, but
No. Okay, so I'll say goodbye to everybody and thank you for your time, and see you on the YouTube channel, Sex Worker Nation, so we can share our information about what we're doing. But thanks, everybody. Talk to you later. Oh, and my t-shirt. Now,
right on.
Antonia Crane made it. Antonia Crane made the shirt, so I'm going to put her link and everybody's links in the show note on the YouTube channel, so you can.
I'm sorry she couldn't join us, but thanks to all my fellow panelists and to Chase. I'm glad we were able to do this.